I built a garden gnome that taught our HOA president an unforgettable lesson about physics. And honestly, I have zero regrets. Because when you spend 6 months terrorizing a neighborhood and destroying property, you don't get to complain when karma finally catches up. It started with a shattered ceramic hat on my driveway. But by the time the flashing lights were illuminating my house at 3 in the morning, this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a full-blown neighborhood war. And looking at Linda holding her injured nose as the paramedics arrived, I knew this moment would either vindicate me or ruin me. But before this story gets wild, drop your city name in the comments because I want to know where you're watching from and if your neighborhood has someone who thinks they own the entire street, because I need to know I'm not the only one dealing with this situation. We moved into the Oak Creek subdivision 3 years ago, specifically because the HOA bylaws were famously relaxed. Basically just mow your lawn and keep things reasonable, which was perfect for me and my wife because we're quiet people who just wanted a yard for our dogs and a place to display my collection. Which brings me to the gnomes. I know some people think they're tacky, but my grandfather carved wood for a living, and he left me a collection of hand-painted, vintage garden gnomes that are worth more than some people's cars, and they mean everything to me. So I placed them tastefully around the flower beds as a tribute to the man who raised me. Everything was peaceful until the HOA election happened, and the old president, a nice guy named Bob who mostly just maintained the peace, retired and was replaced by Linda, a woman whose entire demeanor screamed, "I'm in charge now." Linda didn't just want to run the neighborhood. She wanted to control it, strip it of any personality, and mold it into her perfect vision of suburban uniformity. And her first target was clutter, which is the word she used in the first letter I received just 2 days after taking office. The letter cited Section 7.3 of the bylaws regarding unsightly decor, a clause that hadn't been enforced in 20 years, and demanded the immediate removal of the ceramic infestation. And I remember laughing at the phrasing, thinking it had to be a joke. So I tossed the letter in the recycling and went about my day, which turned out to be my first mistake. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find Norman, a 1950s German-made gnome that my grandfather had restored himself, lying in pieces on the sidewalk, completely destroyed. And it wasn't an accident because the pieces were arranged in a deliberate pile, a message sent loud and clear. I felt this surge of anger, not because of the monetary value, but because of the violation, the fact that someone came onto my property and destroyed something irreplaceable. I walked over to Linda's house, which was 3 doors down, and knocked on the door. And when she answered, she had this smug smile on her face. And before I could even speak, she said, "Oh, I saw what happened to your little decoration. Such a shame. Maybe it's a sign about the aesthetic standards of this community." I told her if she ever stepped foot on my lawn again, I'd involve the authorities. And she just laughed and said, "I'm the HOA president, dear. I have the right to inspect property issues at any time. Read the bylaws." And then she closed the door. That was the beginning of the escalation. And over the next month, things got increasingly intense. I installed a security camera, but she was clever about avoiding it, approaching from blind spots or waiting for technical difficulties. I'd wake up to find gnomes missing, or painted over with gray primer. Or in one disturbing instance, I found Traveler, a rare hiking gnome, damaged and displayed prominently in my garden, like a warning. The psychological impact was getting to me. I was losing sleep, checking the windows constantly, feeling trapped in my own home, and the fines were piling up too, hundreds of dollars, for various alleged violations, all signed by Linda. My wife begged me to just store the gnomes in the garage to end this conflict, but I couldn't do it, because people like Linda don't stop when you surrender. They just find a new target, and I wasn't going to let her win. I went to the police, but without clear video evidence, they said it was a civil matter and advised me to work it out with the board, which was impossible because the board was controlled by Linda and her supporters. I realized that the legal system wasn't going to help me, and the HOA bylaws were working against me, so I had to rely on my own skills. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I design hydraulic systems for industrial machinery, and I realized I had been approaching this all wrong. I was trying to protect fragile ceramic with complaints and documentation, when I should have been protecting it with engineering. I decided to build a special gnome, a Trojan gnome, if you will, something that looked like the others but was built to be completely indestructible and, more importantly, to document any interference and deliver immediate consequences. I spent 3 weekends in my garage working on the Titan. I started with a core of reinforced steel piping, welded to a thick steel plate that I buried 3 feet deep into the ground, anchored with industrial-strength concrete, so this thing was literally part of the earth. immovable by anything short of construction equipment. For the outer shell, I used a high-density polymer resin that I hand-painted to look exactly like weathered ceramic. But this material was incredibly durable. But the defensive capability was the real achievement. I didn't want to cause harm. I just wanted to create consequences. So I installed a pressure-sensitive trigger mechanism in the base. The idea was that if the gnome was tilted significantly, or if it detected a sudden impact, it would trigger a dual-stage response. Stage 1 was a 120 decibel air horn, the kind used on boats, mounted inside the hollow cavity, and Stage 2 was a high-pressure canister of bright blue marking dye mixed with a very unpleasant scent deterrent, which would spray from the gnome's hat in a wide pattern. I also embedded a high-resolution camera in the gnome's eye, hardwired to a recording system in my basement so interference wouldn't work. I placed the Titan right in the center of the flower bed, the most visible spot possible, and I waited. For 3 nights, nothing happened. The neighborhood was quiet, and I sat in my office watching the monitors, drinking coffee, waiting. Then, on the 4th night, Tuesday at 2:45 a.m., I saw movement. It was Linda. I recognized her immediately, even though she was wearing a black hoodie and sunglasses at night, which was absurd. She wasn't empty-handed this time. She was carrying a crowbar, a heavy steel tool that reflected the moonlight. My heart started racing because this was it, the confrontation I had been preparing for. She walked straight up to the Titan, looked around to check for witnesses, and I saw that same entitled expression she wore when she issued bogus fines. She didn't just want to remove the gnome. She wanted to destroy it. She raised the crowbar over her head, using both hands, preparing for a powerful strike. She swung with significant force, expecting to smash through brittle ceramic and send pieces flying, expecting the satisfaction of destruction. Instead, the crowbar connected with the high-density resin shell backed by a solid steel core. Physics is unforgiving. The energy of the swing didn't dissipate into the object. It rebounded. The crowbar bounced off the Titan with a loud metallic sound that echoed through the entire cul-de-sac, and the recoil was instant. The bar flew back and struck her. At the exact same moment, the impact sensor triggered the defense mechanism. The air horn blasted, a sound so loud it shook the windows of my house, and the dye spray activated, coating her in a cloud of bright blue mist and unpleasant scent. I watched on the monitor as she fell to the ground in the flower bed, clearly in shock and discomfort. I ran downstairs because I knew I needed to be the first one to establish what happened. I opened the front door, turning on the porch lights, acting like a concerned homeowner, responding to a disturbance. "What's going on? Who's there?" I called out, moving toward the flower bed. Linda was on the grass, covered in blue dye, the crowbar lying next to her. She was yelling, "My nose! You did this on purpose! You're insane!" Neighbors were turning on their lights. Doors were opening, and within moments, the street was filled with people in bathrobes. I looked at her and said, "Linda, what are you doing in my yard with a crowbar at 3 a.m.? She pointed a trembling, blue-stained finger at me and shouted, "He set a trap! Call the police! He's dangerous!" I saw concern in the neighbors' eyes. They were processing the scene, and I realized how this appeared. I had built a defensive lawn ornament. The police arrived within minutes, 2 cruisers pulling up quickly, lights washing over the scene. An officer approached me and said, "Sir, please step back and keep your hands visible." I complied, my heart pounding. "Officer, she trespassed in my yard. She attacked my property," I explained. But Linda was performing dramatically, claiming, "I was just checking a code issue. He set a trap. He's unstable." The paramedics were assisting her onto a stretcher, and I heard one of them mention possible injuries, and I felt genuine worry. That could mean serious legal consequences. The officer, whose badge read Sergeant Miller, turned to me and said, "Sir, did you place a device in this lawn ornament?" "No," I insisted. "It's a security feature. It's an air horn and marking dye." She struck it with a crowbar and the force rebounded. Miller examined the crowbar, then the gnome, which was standing perfectly intact, completely undamaged, looking calm in the chaos. "We're going to need you to come to the station for a statement," Miller said. "This appears concerning, and there are regulations about property defense systems." I felt my world tilting. This could go very badly. Linda might take legal action against me for everything I owned. I was being escorted toward the patrol car when a voice interrupted. "Officer Miller, please wait a moment." It was Tom. Tom lived directly across the street. He was a quiet neighbor, drove an ordinary car, kept to himself, never attended neighborhood gatherings. We all assumed he was just very private or worked unusual hours. Tom walked down his driveway calmly, holding a tablet. "You need to see this before proceeding," Tom said. Miller paused. "Who are you?" "I'm a private investigator," Tom said, showing identification. "I've been hired by other HOA board members to investigate financial irregularities. I've been conducting surveillance on Linda for 3 months." My jaw dropped. The neighbors gasped audibly. Even Linda, who was being loaded into the ambulance, stopped complaining for a moment. Tom approached the officer and played footage on his tablet. "This is from my professional camera system. You can see clearly that she enters the property carrying a weapon, the crowbar. She approaches the object with obvious intent to damage it. She initiates the strike. The object doesn't explode or attack. It's a solid structure. The injury is caused entirely by the recoil of her own tool striking an immovable object. The air horn and die are secondary, non-harmful deterrents triggered after the impact. This isn't a trap, officer. It's a reinforced structure. If she had kicked a concrete wall and injured herself, you wouldn't hold the wall responsible." Miller watched the footage, reviewed it multiple times. He looked at the crowbar, then at the gnome. He looked at me, then at Tom. "And the financial irregularities?" Miller asked. "I have evidence that she's been using the fines, thousands of dollars collected from neighbors for questionable violations, to pay for personal expenses including home renovations and other debts. I have the financial records right here. She was here tonight because she suspected this gentleman might have footage of her previous vandalism, and she was trying to eliminate the evidence." This revelation changed everything. Tom wasn't the mysterious neighbor. He was actually helping. The officer removed my restraints. "Sir, you're free to go for now, but remain available. We need to process this situation properly." He walked over to the ambulance where Linda was sitting, still covered in blue dye, and informed her of her rights. "Linda Stevens, you are being detained for trespassing, destruction of property, and will be investigating the financial allegations." The expression on her face was pure shock and dismay, but the situation continued. 2 days later, I received a call from an expensive law firm. It was Linda's husband. He was a corporate attorney, the aggressive type. He wanted a meeting. My wife was nervous. She wanted to settle, but Tom, who was now a trusted friend, told me to stand firm. We met in a conference room downtown. Linda's husband, Richard, slid paperwork across the table. "This is a settlement proposal," he said with obvious arrogance. "You will drop all matters. You will issue a public apology admitting your lawn ornament was dangerous, and you will pay for my wife's medical expenses. In exchange, we won't pursue legal action against you." I looked at the papers. It was a substantial amount. I looked at Tom, who was sitting beside me. Tom pulled out a thick folder and slid it back across the table. "Richard," Tom said calmly, "that folder contains documentation of meetings regarding home renovations paid for by HOA funds. It also contains records of personal accounts funded by the same source. It also contains a statement from a contractor confirming billing instructions. If you pursue legal action against my client, this folder goes to the appropriate authorities, professional oversight boards, and tax agencies. Or you can withdraw the lawsuit, resign from the HOA, put your house on the market, and relocate from our neighborhood." Richard went pale. He opened the folder, reviewed several pages, and his demeanor completely changed. He closed the folder, stood up, and left the room without speaking. The outcome was complete. Linda agreed to a lesser charge to avoid more serious consequences, but part of the agreement was full repayment to the HOA. Every single dollar misused had to be returned. They had to sell their house to cover the debts and legal costs. The day they moved out was celebrated like a holiday in Oak Creek. People were actually sitting on their lawns and chairs, enjoying refreshments, waving goodbye. I stood on my front porch, next to the Titan, which I had cleaned and repainted. I looked at the moving truck, and I looked at my garden. I went into the garage and brought out every single gnome I had. I lined them up along the driveway, a collection of ceramic guardians standing watch. I repaired Norman with adhesive, leaving the crack visible as a reminder. The new HOA president is Tom, and the first policy he passed was the Garden Decor Freedom Act, which explicitly allows for creative garden decorations of any quantity. I walked over to the spot where Linda had fallen, where the grass was still slightly stained blue, and I placed a new gnome there. It's a custom one I commissioned. It's a small lady gnome, wearing a black hoodie and sunglasses, with a bandage on her nose and a tiny crowbar in her hand. I call her Karma. And every time I walk past her, I smile. Because sometimes, when you push a reasonable person too far, you discover that they're not just passive, they're an engineer with determination, and a neighbor with documentation, and that is a combination you don't want to challenge. So to anyone dealing with a difficult HOA situation right now, don't give up. Don't let them intimidate you. Document everything. Build your case properly. And if necessary, build a defense that can't be ignored. Because the only thing better than a beautiful garden is a garden that protects itself. If you enjoyed this story of clever engineering and neighborhood justice, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories from suburban life, and let me know in the comments. What's the most unreasonable thing an HOA has ever tried to do to you? I'll be reading the best responses in the next video. Stay safe, stay clever, and keep your gnomes protected.